in Across the Fence, the story of the Snowflake Man. We're going to learn about Vermont native Wilson Snowflake Bentley, the man who proved that no two snowflakes are alike. Good afternoon and thanks for joining us. I'm Judy Simpson. From our childhood, many of us can remember hearing the phrase, "No two snowflakes are alike," and it was a discovery made in Jericho more than 100 years ago by the man known as Snowflake Bentley. Bentley was a self-educated farmer who attracted world attention for his work in science, meteorology, and photography. To mark Bentley's 150th birthday, the town of Jericho and its Historical Society are hosting an upcoming celebration and symposium. We're going to learn more about Bentley and the upcoming celebration with today's guests. Joining me are Catherine McMains and Mark Breen. Catherine chairs the Jericho Select Board, and Mark is known around the state for his eye-on-the-sky weather reports. He is the senior meteorologist and planetarium director at the Fairbanks Planetarium and Museum in St. Johnsbury. It's great to have you both here.
Thanks, Judy.
Now, for people who don't know, who is Snowflake Bentley?
Well, Snowflake Bentley was born in what was called the Nashville section of Jericho in 1865, and he didn't really go to school. His mother, he was self-educated, but was always interested in nature and, loved to fish. He helped farm. He had to do the chores and things like that.
Yeah, and of course, he was given a microscope by his mother and became absolutely fascinated with the whole detail, all those tiny structures that you can see in snow crystals, and so he developed a process of being able to photograph that. He kept journals, and so he suddenly became this kind of amazing, almost tour de force of being somebody who was bringing all of this little detail to the greater world, and eventually he published a number of publications with scientific journals and that type of thing.
Yeah, he was a meticulous record keeper. Mm-hmm. Both of he had multiple notebooks, both of when he took pictures and what the weather conditions were. I mean, so it was amazing how much detail he accumulated over his lifetime.
So what were the influences that led to this boy in rural Vermont to become the first person to actually photograph snowflakes?
Well, his mother was a school teacher and homeschooled her sons, and she encouraged his interest and curiosity about the world of nature around him. He was a voracious reader. But living in rural Vermont, he also developed an appreciation of the beauty of nature that was around him, especially the beauty of snowflakes.
Which is a good thing if you're in Vermont.
Exactly.
And how and when did he evolve into Snowflake Bentley?
I mean, we could talk about the successes in the 1920s, the articles that he had written and were written about him as the Snowflake Man, but really the beginnings were when on his 15th birthday, when his mother gave him a microscope that she had used when she was teaching. And he was able then to begin to see the actual beauty of a snow crystal. He tried to show others the beauty he saw by drawing them, but of course, even under the best of circumstances, the snowflakes would melt, they would distort. But he strived that way for several years and actually did about 400 drawings that way. But he felt there had to be a better way, so that when he was 18, Snowflake Bentley's mother convinced the father to spend $100, which was a huge sum for a farmer in those days, so that he could get a camera and a compatible microscope. And so then, because of the pressure to actually do something with these things, he struggled and struggled, but finally in January of 1885, he successfully produced the first photomicrograph, beginning his lifelong focus on photographing snowflakes.
And Mark, considering the time period and the technology available, give us some sort of perspective on Snowflake Bentley's achievements.
Yeah, well, of course, this is happening at a time when meteorology is in its infancy, but modern meteorology is starting to develop. So there's this whole backdrop of science, advancing. But his particular, skill of, firstly, this unique process of being able to take a photograph through a microscope, suddenly these details that were either briefly visible, they're permanently there. You can study them extensely. In addition to that, you have his appreciation or really his artistry. That was one of the things that he never lost, was that ability to not just take the physical image, but really describe it and put it in terms that were just beautiful.
And so is it really true that no two snowflakes are alike?
Well, it's kind of interesting. So one of the things that he wrote was that he knew that there were tens of thousands of snow crystals that were falling, and only a few of them were going to land on his, palette that he was looking at. But he said that where they formed, he would expect that there would be many that would be alike, that they would be the same size and shape and density. So he kind of predicted, without ever being able to, there was no way for him to be up in the clouds to look at it. And so it was in the 1980s that a researcher from Texas A&M University actually was doing some research in clouds and found two snow crystals exactly alike.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, so Bentley actually had predicted that that's where they would be found, because what happened was, and one of the things he was fascinated with, was the snow crystals changed as they went down through the cloud. And so that's what gave each one its unique figure.
Interesting. And are Bentley and his work still relevant in today's world of atmospheric science, would you say?
Oh, absolutely. We think about, his work being 100 years ago, and certainly technology has advanced, and yet there are still questions that he was working on, questions that he posed that we haven't quite answered yet. There's still some research being done on exactly how a snow crystal is formed. And that becomes important, even in my world of forecasting, in knowing exactly what's going on inside the cloud becomes critical to understand how to forecast. Are we going to see really dense, thick snow? Is it going to be very fluffy? And so he was working very diligently on exactly describing what he was seeing. He did make an observation that he saw a hexagonal form, a six-sided form, inside a or a cooled water droplet. The water droplet itself was actually below freezing, and science at this point still hasn't been able to explain that.
Really? And so, Catherine, as I understand it, though, Bentley's work was largely ignored by his family and his neighbors. You see it as sort of an odd duck.
Yes, exactly. I mean, he lived in a farming community. His father was a farmer. So, I mean, spending all this time taking pictures of snowflakes was considered a waste of time. I mean, you can't eat it. You can't do anything with it.
Right. It doesn't make any money.
It doesn't make any money. And over time, though, neighbors began to appreciate the beauty of what they did. But he still always felt throughout his life that they just couldn't understand, the value of what he was doing. I mean, it's very unique.
And so how did the museum in Jericho come about?
Well, as often happens, if somebody dies, memories fade and materials get scattered about. But Blair Williams, a Jericho resident, was instrumental in reviving the Bentley cache and gathered what Bentley artifacts were in Jericho and started the Jericho Historical Society to showcase them. And family members donated the lantern slide projector and other artifacts. And then the Jericho Historical Society bought the microscope and camera and brought them back to Vermont. And what helped fund the museum to buy, the Historical Society to buy the artifacts, as well as to refresh the old mill so that it actually has a better heating system, having volunteered there for 19 years. So actually since 92. But what we do now, this is very popular because they're doing the Danforth pewter snowflakes to help fund that. But what really started it was the limited edition snowflakes that are made exactly how Bentley would make them. And he used to give these as gifts. There's a cross made of snowflakes that he actually is recorded as giving as gifts to a lot of his people. And the town of Jericho, which uses the iconic red mill as part of its logo with the backdrop of a snowflake, also contributes annually to the museum.
And these are for sale at the museum?
Yes, these are for sale at the museum.
And so now the Historical Society is celebrating Bentley's 150th birthday, and the celebration and symposium is going to be held at the Jericho Elementary School Tuesday, February 10th at 7 o'clock. Catherine, tell us a little bit about what you are doing on February 10th and why.
The symposium is open to all members of the public who are interested in the scientific contributions of Snowflake Bentley and their continued relevance today. Mark is going to moderate a panel made up of experts in photography, atmospheric science, and from the National Weather Service. And two Jericho residents who are members of the VSO are going to play music of the period, because Wilson Bentley himself was fond of music and actually played several instruments. And then Ann Squires, our president of the Historical Society, is going to cut birthday birthday cake so that everybody there gets to help celebrate his birthday. But it is not a program for the very young. So the town library on Wednesday, February 11th is going to have a Snowflake Bentley story hour.
Nice. Now, what was the most surprising thing that you've learned about Bentley, Mark? Well,
actually, I think, as you mentioned, he was a musician. He was actually quite accomplished on the piano and played clarinet. He actually composed music. There was a brass band called the Nashville Band. He composed and played with them. He would take train trips to Burlington to buy the latest sheet music. So he was quite well known in terms of being able to entertain at parties and dances and so forth.
Yeah, I thought the most surprising thing, though, is how underappreciated he was in his own community. Because I was talking about this to my husband, and he says, "But I learned about him in Oklahoma." Oklahoma.
That's interesting.
Yeah, he was taught in school, but he was so underappreciated in his own community. I thought that was the most interesting thing.
And so what's the connection of Wilson Bentley to the Fairbanks Museum?
Well, it was kind of interesting that he was doing some of his early work at the same time that the Fairbanks Museum was being built. Franklin Fairbanks was the son of Erastus Fairbanks, who was a governor of Vermont for a couple of different terms. And the Fairbanks family was a very well-known family at that time. So we're not sure whether Bentley connected with the Fairbanks or vice versa, but we have on display at the museum some of Bentley's photographs, and they have some of those wonderful meticulous notes that he took. That this particular snowflake fell on February 1st, 1899. This was the temperature, and the wind direction was northwest. And so, we have this wonderful display that was contemporary with him taking those images.
Is it possible to take some of that information and kind of go back in time and look at it from your records to find out what was happening weather-wise and the correlations?
Yes, actually one of the fascinating things, I've done this program before at the Jericho Historical Society where we took a look at the specific storms that he was collecting, and one of the things that was very interesting was the term blizzard really didn't come into our lexicon per se until the 1880s. And so this is happening immediately after this word got introduced. So he described many, many storms as blizzards when, in fact, they might have produced 3 inches of snow.
No kidding.
So it was just very interesting to see that. But we can indeed tie specific snow crystals to particular storms.
Yeah.
That's interesting. And so it's interesting to point out, too, that it was actually snow that did him in.
Yes, I know. Because he walked wherever he could, and walking home in a blizzard, and he caught pneumonia, and then shortly thereafter died.
And so it's interesting that this diligent, trained scientist never really lost his wonder for the beauty and the magic of snow. And Mark, I know you wanted to read something he had written.
Well, we hear so much about have to be so cautious or worried about this particular weather coming up, when in fact he really loved weather. So one of the things that I just caught my eye the other day, it says, "There is no surer road to fairyland than that which leads to the observation of snow forms. To such a student, winter storms are no longer a gloomy phenomenon to be dreaded. Even a blizzard becomes a source of the keenest enjoyment and satisfaction, as it brings to him, from the dark, surging ocean of clouds, forms that thrill his eager soul and pleasure."
That's a new way to look at the weather.
Yeah, because he loved winter. He absolutely adored winter.
That's amazing. And I'm just going to read this one other thing that he had written. "Under the microscope, I found that snowflakes were miracles of beauty, and it seemed a shame that this beauty should not be seen and appreciated by others. Every crystal was a masterpiece of design, and no one design was ever repeated. When a snowflake melted, that design was lost forever. Lost. Just that much beauty was gone, without leaving any record behind." So I guess he thought that was his mission then, to leave a record of snowflakes.
Well, he had a passion for beauty, and he wanted other people to share that passion.
Well, before we go, we want to quickly talk about the Snowflake Bentley 150th birthday celebration. It's going to be held at the Jericho Elementary School Tuesday, February 10th at 7 p.m. That's Thursday, February 10th at 7 p.m.
It's
Tuesday.
Tuesday.
It is Tuesday. Okay, there's a misprint in my script, but it's Tuesday. And there's also other events happening in town as well.
Right, yes. For the younger folks, the town library is going to focus on crafting snowflakes and having, Snowflake Bentley story time and stuff, so
nice.
that everybody gets to participate in the celebration.
Well, terrific. Well, thanks so much for joining me today and talking about it.
Thank you.
He's an interesting man.
Thanks,
Judy.
That's our program for today. I'm Judy Simpson. We'll see you again next time on Across the Fence.